the Honorable Prime Minister, Ranil Wickremesinghe, Vice President Vincent Meriton, Minister Sushma Swaraj, my ministerial colleagues from across the Indian Ocean and beyond, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, in case you're wondering why Singapore is represented here, I just need to situate Singapore as we are at the southernmost tip of the continent of Asia, 1 degree 15 minutes north of the equator. And if you try to connect the Indian Ocean to the Pacific Ocean, chances are you would pass by Singapore. So the Indian Ocean is an area of major interest to us. I want to thank the India Foundation, the National Institute of Fundamental Studies, and the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies of Singapore for co-organizing this timely conference. I recall that Singapore had the privilege of hosting the inaugural Indian Ocean Conference last year. It was well received. We had participants from 22 countries. And I remember that Minister Sushma was there with us on video conference live as well. The theme at last year's conference was Committee, Culture, and Commerce. This year, the theme is Peace, Progress, and Prosperity. And I believe this is most apt. Let me briefly make 3 points. The first on the theme of peace. It's remarkable that the Indian Ocean, which has been a stage for the exchange of knowledge, language, culture, and religion across the enormous diversity of all our states for the past 4,000 years, has been remarkable for its peace. If you think about the Pacific Ocean, the Atlantic, in fact, if you think of even the Mediterranean, what makes the Indian Ocean outstanding over 4,000 years has been the remarkable presence of peace during almost the entire history of this area. And perhaps we should ask ourselves, or I'll leave it to the academics over the next few days, why is it that the Indian Ocean was an area of peace for so many millennia? Why is it that we could have merchants from many independent states coming from a very wide diversity of ethnic, religious, and cultural backgrounds, able to transact, able to travel, and able to exchange and trade peacefully? If you think about it, the first wave of globalization was actually conducted in this part of the world too. The early civilizations of ancient Egypt, Sumeria, and the Indus Valley arguably owed much of their prosperity to trade in the Indian Ocean. And over time, we saw increasingly complex trade routes linking the East African coast to the Arabian Peninsula, to South Asia, to Southeast Asia, and to South China. In the 13th and 14th century, this thriving trade was witnessed by chroniclers such as Marco Polo and Ibn Battuta. And our Arab merchants facilitated the widespread and peaceful adoption of an eclectic and tolerant form of Islam in Southeast Asia. And in fact, if you think about it, Islam in Southeast Asia was achieved through trade and persuasion. It was never conducted through the sword. So our point here is that continued prosperity in the Indian Ocean is contingent on the Indian Ocean remaining peaceful and open. And therefore, the converse is that if the stability in the Indian Ocean comes under threat, so does our continued prosperity. And for a small trading nation like Singapore, where trade is 3.5 times our GDP, this is an existential threat. I'll move on to my second point, which is on progress. We all know that trade in the Indian Ocean helped to vastly improve the quality of life for all of us who participated in this. There are many stories of the fabled overland Silk Route. That's far more famous. But actually, if you think about it, far more people benefited from the maritime trade in the Indian Ocean. With seaborne trade, you could trade in bulk goods, including cotton, cloth, foodstuffs, timber, which could not be loaded onto camels and mules. So for instance, we see wood timber being shipped from Africa to the Arabian Peninsula where timber is scarce, but needed for the construction of buildings. Sri Lanka provided high-quality pepper and spices that was valued the world over. This was a form of democratization of trade. For the first time, a mass market, consumer market goods were available and benefited from this global trade, and it was not just a question of luxury goods such as silks for the elites, which was more commonly transported over the overland maritime Silk Road. Even today, sea transport is still the most cost-effective way to transport goods. The United Nations Conference on Trade and Development estimates that roughly 80% of global trade by volume and 70% by value is transported by sea. And we know that a huge proportion of that flows through the Indian Ocean. And this is also why the 1982 United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS for short, is of such crucial importance for all of us bordering the Indian Ocean. The opening of trade and the economies helped to raise the standard of living for all of us. And as I said before, because this was a democratized form of trade of commodities, it benefited everyone. It provided a catalyst for the exchange of ideas, the technology, and the development of infrastructure and increased prosperity for all of us. Which brings me to my third and final point on prosperity. We are now in a new age of uncertainty. There are many reasons, many factors behind this current age of global uncertainty. You can think of the changing relativities amongst the superpowers. You can think of the changing trade patterns. But there is one other factor, and that is what some people have called the Industrial Revolution 4.0. There's a sense in many countries that middle-class wages are stagnating. There's anxiety about job losses because jobs may become obsolete. And the problem is, you see it in the political arena. You see a rising tide of protectionism and anti-immigration sentiment worldwide. And this happens in all our societies, and our political systems and the tone of political debate reflects this. Unfortunately, free and open trade has very often been blamed for this anxiety. But the reality is that actually we are living through a technological revolution. The near simultaneous advances in pervasive computing, in mobile and broadband communications, artificial intelligence, robotics, 3D printing, additive manufacturing, augmented reality, all these simultaneous revolutions. And then if you add in further revolutions in nanotechnology and genomics, all this has completely transformed the way value is created, the way the fruits of these values are distributed. And that's why there's this angst, this anxiety in our societies. My point today is that we need to make the right diagnosis, and we need, therefore, to come up with the right solutions. In Singapore, we believe that this starts with making sure our people are equipped with the right skills, the tools, and the knowledge that they need. And therefore, it is, in a sense, a new wave of focusing and transforming our education and our training systems. This is the only way to close the gap between a skills mismatch and a jobs mismatch, on the other hand. And if we can do so, And if we can do so effectively across the Indian Ocean, then we will be able to ride on the historical advantages that the Indian Ocean has had as an ocean of peace and as a medium which has transmitted ideas, which has facilitated trade, and which has uplifted all our societies. We need to make the point that inclusive and sustainable growth is not a zero-sum game, and that no nation today facing the age of disruption can succeed by trying to erect walls, erect barriers, protectionism, or insulation. Instead, we need to go back to the ancient philosophy of the Indian Ocean, which is to embrace our interdependence, to have open, inclusive, and fair regional architectures, to eschew attempts at domination, to instead focus on interdependence, win-win collaboration, and the exchange of ideas and tools and technologies in a fair and just way. So if we can achieve this, then globalization and this digital revolution that we're living on will give us a chance to leapfrog many other parts of the world, and I hope with some reasonable optimism that we will be the most vibrant, dynamic economic space in the world in the decades to come. And let us not also forget that we have a demographic dividend that's not yet been fully harvested. Again, if you look at the Indian Ocean and you compare it to the Pacific or even the Atlantic, we have a significantly younger population, hungry for knowledge, able to utilize the latest digital tools, and they deserve our support. And I am sure that all of us in this room and beyond will commit to creating this future for them, when there will be a new golden age for a new middle class, equipped with the necessary knowledge, skills, tools, and relationships. Thank you all very much for your attention.